what's up, troops? Ops Sgt-Maj Jeff Evely back with you now. Veterans for Freedom. Yeah, that's who we are. Second live stream today on this 31st day of March 2023. I have with me here now regular contributor Catherine Christenson from Valour Law. And Valour Law is a firm that specializes particularly in serving military legal issues. So this is a service that's really needed in Canada. The only thing that the CAF really has for people to be able to represent themselves and defend themselves if something is going wrong is through the grievance process. And of course, that goes right back to the chain of command. And there's a military justice system. And so there's kind of the entire institution versus one little troop with, if you're lucky, somebody to advise them on how the grievance process works. So it's terribly insufficient for the kind of David versus Goliath situation that they have set up there. So anyway, we're very grateful to have somebody like Catherine around, really taking it to them on this one. So I'll go ahead and bring her in now. Hey, Catherine, how you doing? Welcome back.
I'm doing great, thanks.
Okay,
and
good.
I'm looking forward to our chat today.
Yeah. It's been a while since we had a chance to do a catch up, so it's really good to have you back in here. I've been making the rounds this week, just checking in on all the regulars. So it's really good to have you back here. And it looks like this is something that's kind of happened since the last time we spoke. This is just a little news article I pulled up on Google here. I don't really know this publication, but it says Canada ratifies ILO C-190 to end violence and harassment at work. I love how these people think that the state just grants wishes and you can sort of do away with human nature with this kind of thing. And it's always suspicious when we have to go to these higher bodies to do that. But I'll just read a couple of paragraphs here, and maybe we'll get a couple of thoughts from you there. And it says the government of Canada became the 25th country to ratify the International Labour Organization's Convention C-190, which is a framework of global standards aimed at eliminating violence and harassment in the world of work. It is an important milestone in our union's mission to create workplaces and communities free of violence, harassment, and discrimination. Unifor has advocated for the federal government to ratify this framework since it was adopted by the ILO in June of 2019. Several sector leaders within Unifor spoke publicly, and the government officials, about how adopting the framework could lead to a much needed changes in their work environment. And then it goes on to say harassment and violence aren't exclusive to physical workplaces. In a 2021 Ipsos poll, 70% of Canadian media workers said they experienced online harassment in previous years, with 73% feeling the attacks were becoming more frequent. Oh, those poor trolls in the media. And nobody better here than Shameless O'Regan. That's a little something I like to rope into the title here. This guy was the Minister of Veterans Affairs, who was like, yeah, I'm a veteran like you guys, because I used to be on TV. So
yeah. He has PTSD from that job.
Yeah, he's a real piece of work, isn't he? So there's Shameless, and here's the official press release from the Government of Canada. And it says today, Minister of Labour Shameless O'Regan ratified International Labour Organization's Convention 190, the Violence and Harassment Convention of 2019 in Geneva, Switzerland. Minister O'Regan was accompanied by Minister Gilbert Hungbo and Director General of the ILO. And where is he? Here he is. Here's a quote from Shameless himself. Quote, "No one should face violence or harassment on the job, not in Canada or anywhere else. We're joining countries around the world to protect workers and make sure they have the safe, respectful workplaces they deserve." What do you make of that one there, Kat?
Well, as far as the Canadian Armed Forces, maybe it's a good thing that regular laws don't apply. I hear our Chief of Defense Staff thinks that Canadian Armed Forces don't actually follow the rule of law. So does that mean
what's that? What did I miss?
Have to adopt that. What did you miss? Oh no, actually I was in court in February with a lawyer who not on anything related to COVID or anything, just another judicial review. And I actually heard him tell the justice on the bench that the court has no authority over the chief of defense staff in military matters. And I was quite intrigued by the look on the justice's face that he was being told he had no jurisdiction over anyone. I mean, as far as I know, the rule of law, everybody is treated equally.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of did my best parade face because I'm thinking, oh, just wait, because there's a big lawsuit coming at you about
Yep.
accountability of the chief of defense staff under the law. So, yeah. So anyway,
That is kind of,
that's their take on it. But
it's not a surprising take to me either. I was going to say that does seem to be a common
yeah,
attitude. I think we talked about this a while back
mm-hmm,
when we were discussing the vaccine mandate and how the troops were told
mm-hmm,
that they don't have any human rights because they joined the military.
mm,
One of
yeah,
those, the line is always when you sign the dotted line, enter your obligation in here. But they're basically being told that, yeah, when you sign the dotted line, you signed all your rights away. And regular Canadian law doesn't apply to you anymore. Which I
yeah,
always found
yeah,
to be,
wrong.
yeah, yeah. I had a chief warrant officer once try to argue that I wasn't a citizen of Canada because I signed the dotted line and joined the military. And I was like, well, I've been voting in the elections and paying taxes. So, uh,
Well, I mean, the perfect example of that is if you were charged with a crime,
yeah.
you got all your rights. You were allowed to talk to counsel, blah, blah, blah. So if you didn't have any rights when you were charged, you would just go straight to prison because there's no sense having a trial because you don't have any rights.
Yeah.
And
J'accuse.
doesn't
And
matter,
that's,
yeah, you know.
yeah.
So,
Um,
but
March in the guilty
I've,
bastard,
I've,
as we like
right,
to say.
yeah, exactly. which
Um,
which I was reading on Rory Fowler's blog about the summary hearings and the summary that with the changes, and he was hot under the collar about the whole military justice system and how crooked it is. So I quite enjoyed reading that one. So,
and I
but
think
anyway,
there might
this
even,
go
so I
ahead.
was just going to say, I think I've heard some folks even argue that the summary trial system is like unconstitutional or something. It's practically extrajudicial. They have an awful lot of broad discretion when it comes to laying those charges. But if I'm not mistaken, it kind of sticks with you too. Like you're talking about a legal finding in
Right,
Canada under it's not the criminal justice system, it's the military justice system. And just so everybody's tracking, like once you fall under the military justice system, it's not the case that you no longer fall under the criminal justice system. It's just
right,
that now you have an extra set of laws in which you need to
right.
abide.
You're under two sets of law. Well, here's what happening since they
Mhm.
brought in the whole summary hearing thing is that instead of charging people, which if it's a service infraction, they should be charging people and allowing them to have a hearing,
Mhm.
they're using remedial measures because then they don't have to provide any evidence
Mhm.
and they can just put it through under as an administrative thing. So
That
that's the
was,
issue. That's
uh,
the issue.
and
Mm-hmm.
wasn't that, I, as I recall, that was exactly the kind of dirty tricks that they got up to with the enforcement of the so-called vaccine mandate, where these,
Bingo. Perfect
yeah,
example.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
the chief of defense staff, Woke Weiner, General Iyer, would go on the TV and say, without using the specific wording of the National Defense Act, that this was disobedience of a lawful command. He wouldn't say
Mm-hmm.
it that way exactly, but he would make it out to be disobedience of a lawful command. And if it is disobedience of a lawful command, well, then they should be charged, right? But
Where's the court martial?
exactly. But if they
Yeah.
had a court martial, then there would be legal standards that would apply, and it would be out of the hands of the
Mm-hmm.
chain of command and into the military justice system. So they can't
Oh,
have
geez,
that.
Jeff, the rights would come in.
Exactly.
The other thing with the vaccine mandate, a perfect example for remedial measures, that's why he didn't bring it in as an order under Section 126 of the National Defense Act, because he had the authority to order a vaccination.
Hmm.
But if you did not take the vaccination, you have to be charged and court-martialed. And if you have a reasonable excuse to not take it, you're acquitted. And they couldn't risk people being acquitted because then that weakens the whole mandate.
Yeah.
sets the precedent.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
mhm.
And
So,
I'll just say, like with the remedial measures, that's undergone, some revision over the years and stuff like that. But the thing about it is, my entire career, it's always been quite a burr under the saddle of many a senior NCO that you spend 2 years doing all the paperwork and the remedial measures to get somebody fired, because that's basically how long it takes as a baseline to get them kicked
mhm,
out if they don't belong in uniform. They're not suitable for service, because that's the wording that you get in the remedial measures.
mhm,
And if somebody's legit not suitable, you can't get them out. You'll do the 2 years worth of paperwork, and then it'll go up the chain, and they'll kick it back
mhm.
and say, no, retain this person. But with the,
Yep.
the case of the vaccine mandate, we actually saw the full force of remedial measures, unmitigated for the first time ever, where they were forcing people out in like 30 days. Am I wrong about that?
And some people only got a couple of weeks. I have one guy that was out in 6 days.
Holy smokes.
How do you release somebody in 6 days?
It's not possible. As
Yeah.
far as I understood it, you had to.
I
You,
got
you,
one guy whose pay was stopped immediately.
wow.
They just don't follow their own policies.
Yeah.
And under Directive 3, which didn't remove the mandate still exists for the forces. Air told anybody who's didn't have a release date they had to come back to work. And you want to talk about harassment?
Hmm.
This workplace that apparently has no harassment, zero harassment uh, idea. Uh, I got people that are the harassment is so blatant, it's so bad. Now they're getting really bad postings
Oh
because it's
yeah.
posting season. Yep, yep.
Yeah, and that I'll say that conforms well with my experience. Is basically every process at their fingertips. They will abuse it for the purpose of making your life
Hmm.
miserable. If you're, not going along with the corruption, if you're not drinking the Kool-Aid, if you're
Well,
not.
and the other side of that, Jeff, is that all the people who felt coerced to take it because they were threatened with all kinds of things
Mhm.
took the vaccination, and now they're watching people come back to work who didn't have the vaccination, who were paid while they were not there. You want to talk about dissent in the ranks.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
pitting people against each other. There's nothing like,
Mm,
separating people into groups and applying different sets of rules to each group, to
yep.
to get them at each other's throats. So um,
Hmm.
all of
Well,
this.
and then the house, yeah, then the housing benefit. So I know of one battalion was told a bunch of young guys are told they'd lose their LDP if they didn't get vaccinated, which wasn't true. But now they brought in the new pay scale. So guess what? They took the vaccination, and a year later, they're getting it taken away.
They're getting their LDP taken away.
So, yeah.
And
Now
I
on
saw,
Monday, 300 sailors in the Navy resigned all at once on Monday. 300.
really.
Yeah.
Um, so that was a coordinated effort. This is the first I'm hearing of it, though. That's
Yeah.
I'll say that's
If we had
positive.
battleships, that's an entire battleship worth of people,
No kidding.
right?
Um,
So,
well, yeah, and the ships that we do have are lead contaminated. The drinking water is lead contaminated. So, um,
among other things. But
yeah,
yeah, so this whole solidarity, we're gonna make it the workplace safer for all and no harassment. It ain't working, Wayne.
yeah. I get such a kick out
So,
of these guys. Like they think they can just kind of pass a law or pass a rule, and it's like, there we go,
mm-hmm.
problem solved, guys. We fixed it.
Mm-hmm.
We have this C-190 now,
Yeah.
and we saw Viva Frey here going after the army,
Oh,
over.
this was fun.
Yeah, you were following this, were
I
you?
love this.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
was,
Go
yeah,
go ahead and
yeah.
break this down for us.
Okay, so Viva Fry is a Canadian lawyer. He was from Montreal. He teamed up with Robert Barnes in the States, and I've been following them for years. And so today, being International Transgender Day, the Canadian Army put their foot in it and made a big post on Twitter. saying that they reaffirm their commitment to providing an open and inclusive working environment that allows Canadians to serve their country with pride and foster a culture where everyone is free to be their authentic selves. The Canadian Army supports the dignity and inclusion of all persons as part of our military ethos. Every member of the One Army team is entitled to work in an environment where they feel safe and respected. Comments that are derogatory or hateful in nature will be removed. For those who are unwilling to accept all people into one Army team, including Indigenous people, women, visible minorities, people with disabilities, and members of the LGBTQ2 plus communities, or our support for them, we suggest you no longer follow this page. Funny how the unvaccinated would fall under what's being discriminated. Anyway, Viva Fry responds with, "You yourselves are, quote, unwilling to accept all people, unquote. You truly are a disgrace and have made a mockery of the Canadian Army."
Nice.
And then he starts posting about, didn't you cut personnel because of their moral, religious, and or medical objections to the vaccine? Why, yes, you did. Very inclusive and tolerant of you, you shameless virtue signaling hypocrites.
I got that one up right here. Shameless virtue signaling hypocrites.
Yeah.
And he's got the CTV News article. Canadian military cuts dozens of unvaccinated troops, puts hundreds more on notice. Yeah, and
as you know, I'm working on the big lawsuit for that one, so it was nice to see.
You got anything to share with us on that front?
Yes, it's all coming together. We're on the final drafts of affidavits, more and more evidence getting put together. Helping me do that is my upcoming appearance at the National Citizens Inquiry on April 26th in Red Deer. I am going to be there speaking on behalf of military members and veterans, because of course I'm not in the chain of command, so they can't shut me up. And the committee's very interested, and they're talking about possibly having me do a second hour in Ottawa later on. So
wow, yeah, that's great. And I'll say it again, like the people in the Canadian Armed Forces really need somebody who's outside the chain of command like that to really be able to express what's going on. So yeah, here's Viva. You yourselves are unwilling to accept all people. You truly are a disgrace and have made a mockery of the Canadian Army. So well done, Viva, for sticking up for the troops on that one. And I guess I'd like to talk a little bit about maybe kind of like the grounds for the lawsuit, because I remember I was there until September 2021. That's when I got released. So everything was, the mandate came down in October of 2021.
Yes.
So I'm like, phew, I just skated out of there somehow, miraculously. But I was a harassment advisor for, the last 15, 16 years of my career. So I'm pretty conversant in the Canadian Human Rights Act. I wasn't, just kind of one of the slugs who got the check in the box either. Like, I actually did my job and took it seriously. And people would ask me, especially a lot of the older guys that I talked to, they'd be like, why don't they just mandate it? When are they just going to mandate this vaccine? They would say it in the break room, even when, we would be in the boardroom for our breaks. And a lot of the higher ups, the older guys would be like, when is the CDS just going to mandate this? So, we can do this already. And I always said, like, my understanding is that it would violate human rights code to do that. So, and then sure enough, as soon as I got out, I was like, wow, they really did it. It just blew me away. But I'm not the legal mind here. That was just sort of my layperson stake based on my.
Yeah, it's not just. It's just not your rights. It's also bodily autonomy. Because the CDS is basically saying, and he still stands by this today, which is why we need to challenge him in court, is that he has the right to order anyone in the military to do anything he wants with their bodies. So where's that stop? He says it's for operational readiness. Well, pregnancy interferes with operational readiness. So if women get pregnant, that interferes. They have to take maternity leave, etc. So, and then if a guy's wife or girlfriend is pregnant, they might get brought back from deployment for the delivery. They might go on paternity leave. So does that mean he can order everyone to be sterilized who's serving in the Canadian Armed Forces?
Great point.
He says he can. If he says he hasn't got enough women in the Canadian Armed Forces, can he order people to have sex changes? He says he can.
Apparently, he
So
seems to think he
that's the
can.
bodily autonomy piece. Then there's the other piece of informed consent. That's a really big one, because the Canadian Armed Forces were informed by a base surgeon in Nova Scotia in February of 2021 that they did not have, under the legal medical definition of informed consent, they did not have informed consent. And the more I dig into it, because I have a registered nurse background, and I was just at the COVID litigators conference in Atlanta. Informed consent is a big one, because they definitely did not meet informed consent. So we've got issues like that we're digging into on top of everything else. So yeah.
And I mean, if they go ahead and administer that injection without informed consent, my understanding is that meets the definition of assault under the criminal code.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Because assault can be criminal code, and it can also be in the civil arena. So you can be sued for assault, and you can also be charged with assault. Okay. So I have some tough questions to ask the Surgeon General when I got him under oath for questioning.
I can't wait.
Especially since I'm, my RN background, I can throw the medical stuff at him. So I have some tough questions for him, because when I was a law student, I wrote an independent research paper on informed consent. Ironically enough, who knew I'd need it now? But so I pretty familiar with that one. And,
funny
so
how
it's going to be really interesting.
Funny how that's working out, eh? All these things that we never thought we never thought we were going to have to deploy a lot of these skills, but here we are.
My constitutional law book, I used to fall asleep with it, draped across my chest. It was like, and now here I am becoming a constitutional law lawyer. Who knew?
Yeah, everybody is. I had Tom Marazzo on here last night, and we had the Constitution up on the screen where he's going. He knows it really well too. He was going like Section 7, Section 1, just in his head, and I was like, "Hang on here, let me get it up on the screen for the viewers." And yeah, I mean, everybody is diving into these things these days. So interesting time.
Well, and we have a serious legal question of does the Charter of Rights need to be rewritten because of that get out of jail free card for the government? If they can justify it, our courts have sort of said. And I was listening to a lawyer presenting at the National Citizens Inquiry in Toronto yesterday. He's a law professor. He did an excellent presentation. I recommend anyone to go back and watch his presentation, because he goes into how that our charter isn't working, because the courts have essentially ripped the guts out of it because of that if it's reasonable, they can infringe on your rights. There's
I think that was
lots
Bruce
of things
Party,
are getting
right?
looked at.
Bruce Party, I think that was.
Him.
Yeah. And he's a professor at Queen's there. That was a good presentation. And I really enjoyed the piece that he delivered there about the 3 pillars of government, and how, we have a legislature, and we have an administrative state, and we have a judiciary, and they're all supposed to remain independent. And this is vital to our basic liberties, because the whole purpose of having that separation of power is to avoid a concentration of power within the hands of the few, which never goes well when we're talking about humans. He was calling it the triumph of the administrative state, because what seems to have happened over a number of years is that the legislators keep delegating this decision-making authority over our day-to-day lives to bureaucrats, and they say, the minister of this can do this, or the public health officer of that can do this, and
the chief of defense staff can do this.
Yep.
So I don't know if you recall, Jeff, back when Julie Paquette was Governor General, she got booted out because of what she was doing with her staff, and they needed a temporary Governor General. Do you remember who they put in?
I don't.
It was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, temporarily became Governor General as well. And nobody was talking about it at the time. And I'm like, we have division of powers.
Yeah.
the head of the judiciary as head of the executive branch of the. What happens if any laws that he signed off on as Governor General come before him in the Supreme Court?
Yeah,
Does that mean they've already been decided, or do they need to be heard and he needs to recuse himself?
right.
So,
Exactly.
I mean, there's a perfect example of Canada where all three branches have just kind of merged into this one. And that is not a constitutional democracy as far as I remember my constitutional law class.
Well,
So,
yeah, and it fits with this broader theme, I think, that we're seeing right now. I would say that it's more like a return to the rule of man as opposed to the rule of law. And what we keep hearing is that, well, now we have a special rapporteur who's just beyond reproach. He's one of the special and perfect humans,
mm,
there's no he's not corruptible in any way. So this is the kind of messiah that we've been looking for to solve our problems.
I can't believe Johnson took that job.
Yeah.
He finished as Governor General as, respected by all sides, and just completely shattered his legacy.
Yeah,
Shattered it.
I've seen a couple of articles to that effect too. I think people are really taking it to him. Like it's just such a flagrant conflict of interest. First of all, being his ski daddy, being Trudeau's ski daddy when he was a kid. So this is basically like a distant uncle to him, not even so distant. And also he was on the Trudeau Foundation. He was on the board of directors while they were taking CCP money. So he's implicated.
Yeah.
And he was still Governor General when a lot of this was really ramping up all the way back as far as like 2015 that we're going to be looking into now. So he would have been targeted, by the CCP for an influence operation if he were Governor General. So the whole thing just stinks.
It does. What you can take it to the new temporary ethics commissioner. She's completely clean.
Oh yeah, I just saw something about that. The new ethics commissioner is an in-law, I think, of a sitting MP, a sitting Liberal MP.
I don't know if it's MP. It's a minister, isn't it? Government minister.
Yeah. Well, yeah, a minister and MP. I'm just not sure specifically who it is.
No.
But again, there's the family connection, and this is all kind of a reversion. Like I say, it's very much in line with a reversion to the rule of man, and we have these kind of family dynasties who rule over us now, and so it's really
kind of like North Korea.
Yeah, North Korea or China, which is essentially a Han dynasty at this point. A lot of people forget that there are Cantonese there too, but we don't hear a lot from those guys because they're just kind of dominated by the dominant tribe, which is the Han tribe, and then they're ethno supremacists and they hate us. So, but. There's this. This is a bit of an interesting angle that I saw here in the Ottawa Citizen here, and this is this Pugliese, David Pugliese, I think. I don't see the name on this one. Yeah, it is David. There's David Pugliese, and I have my issues with this guy, but at least he's always shining a spotlight on the chain of command. I called him out on one of his articles one time in the chats when I probably wasn't supposed to because I was still in uniform. But I tell you what, he changed the title of the article after I schooled him.
There you go.
So it was worth it. It says military leaders told sex misconduct scandal was a PR war. Quote, as confronting adversaries internationally, this has become a battle over the narrative, close quote, warned the analysis obtained by the newspaper using the Access to Information Law. So he says the Canadian military senior leadership was advised the sexual misconduct crisis was a battle for public opinion, and those who raised concerns were akin to foreign enemies. That's an interesting way of putting it. In a series of documents produced for then acting Chief of Defense Staff General Wayne Iyer and other senior leaders in March 2021, advisors highlighted the need to push more positive views about how the Canadian Forces was handling the ongoing sexual misconduct crisis. One analysis noticed that the sexual misconduct and the assault issue had become so high profile because survivors were bringing their stories to the news media and the military had no control over that. Quote, there are many actors outside of defense who are providing perspectives and shaping the public discourse, close quote. More on the analysis obtained by the newspaper using the Access to Information Law. Quote, as confronting adversaries internationally, this has become a battle over the narrative. And then I'll read one more paragraph here. It says the sexual misconduct crisis hit the Canadian Forces in early 2021. Retired Defense Chief General Jonathan Vance was put under investigation, and his successor, Admiral Art McDonald, had to take a paid leave as police examined allegations against him. Over the course of the next year, more than 10 senior military officers faced allegations of sexual misconduct or inappropriate actions. So, any thoughts on that one there, Catherine? What do
Well,
you think?
part of bringing a big lawsuit is doing ATIPs.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the ATIPs that we asked for were things like briefing notes of generals.
Mm-hmm.
See, Chief of Defense Staff, what were your briefing notes related to the COVID mandates? And I have seen Vance's briefing note, and he was basically told you couldn't do it. And a few weeks after this, all of a sudden he's out on sexual misconduct. I have McDonald's briefing note, same thing, you can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden he's out on sexual misconduct. General Fortin, who was head of the vaccine and rollout, all of a sudden he's up on sexual misconduct. Did he say no to a mandate for the public?
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen General Cadou's briefing note to air says you can't do a mandate. And sure enough, what's he charged with? Sexual misconduct. There's too much of a pattern here. It seems to be the flavor of the day to remove somebody from who's in the way of political gain. Because we've got under oath, or in an affidavit from Trudeau's office, in the Peckford hearings, Keith Wilson did questioning and also pulled affidavits. And from the Prime Minister's office, there are emails which show that Justin Trudeau was angry because he was being booed and heckled, and he was bringing a mandate to punish people, and they were struggling to justify bringing in a mandate. This is all sworn documents filed with the federal court. So this is a political thing, and I have to question why suddenly, in that brief time period, we have all these senior officers.
Mm-hmm.
Did they stand up and say, no, we're not going to do this?
I am wondering.
I mean,
the same
it
thing.
looks kind of suspicious to me.
Certainly it does. I don't have a whole lot of good things to say about like Jonathan Vance, for example. It was just such a tired
He and I
cliche.
butted heads many times. We butted heads lots.
You're one of the good ones, so that's not surprising. But and it's the hypocrisy, I guess. And he was just one of the guys. I think we were all kind of, let's hope that this guy is going to be the one. He's going to be on our side. And then he kind of got up there and stuck his nose up in the air and started lecturing us. And we're like, oh my God, another one of them's going to sell us out. And that's what he did basically.
Well, and the hypocrisy, right? Because he was having an affair with a subordinate while he was preaching up honor to everybody else. Yeah,
exactly. He was basically.
But that wasn't sexual misconduct. That was an affair that was agreed to by both parties.
But he himself
is
saying to us that when we do that kind of thing, that's called an adverse personal relationship. So there you go. And we're talking about an officer that would be junior to this guy. So he is her superior in the chain of command. And that was one of the recommendations that came out of the Deschamps report, is that anytime there's any dating going on and a difference of rank is involved, then it's supposed to be declared to the chain of command, which I was never on board with that recommendation at all. Really only when somebody is in your direct chain of command, like your you are their superior, you have administrative control, operational control, or strategic control, or something like that. You have the authority to boss them around. Well, that becomes a problem. But a lot of the time, like, we're just dealing with people and different units, different chains of command. You don't see them on a daily basis, anything like that. But you tend to have more in common with people in the military than you do with the civilians. So it's service couples is a thing and always has been a thing. And he really seems to be the guy who's been clamping down on the idea that we're ever going to have any service couples in the future. But at the same time, he's calling these kinds of things like adverse personal relationships, and we all need to be super vigilant on this stuff. But at the same time, he's off fathering 2 kids with his mistress, and he never takes any responsibility for it. I mean,
right.
God, it's just so sickening. So gross.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
but here's
no clean hands there. But the timing is so suspicious. Like, why this had been going on for years? Why all of a sudden, with the COVID mandate demand coming in from the government, is he needs to be removed? Yeah. Well, and when the balloon was shot down and Trudeau got up and made this big announcement about how he gave the order. Last time I checked, Trudeau is not the one who gives the military orders.
No, he doesn't. He's not the commander-in-chief. The governor-general is.
No.
Yep. And
or our new king.
Yeah. The king would be the sovereign, and in Canada, the governor-general is the commander-in-chief. But she doesn't give any orders either. Like, that's all very ceremonial and clearly needs to be updated. But it's grounded in this idea that we need a separation of powers. We can't have, the partisan politician like Trudeau, with this kind of unmitigated authority to order the military to do things, because, I think we know what he would do with that power. I mean,
the scuttlebutt was he tried with the protesters and didn't have any compliance from our armed forces because they weren't going to raise their rifles to peaceful Canadians. So that's some of the scuttlebutt I've been hearing. So
that is kind of, I've been hearing that a lot too. So I don't know if there's any way
during the commission during the commission, the testimony from the ministers were they were joking about pulling in the military. So
tanks.
I think they tried. Yeah, I think they tried and were told no.
Yeah. How many tanks can we get? I figure 1 will do, they said. So it's all very cavalier, when it comes to the application of state violence. That's what we're talking about here. And they seem to treat it like it's all this big joke. It's just politics as usual, whatever it takes to maintain power. But here's an article from the CBC. It says, a military in crisis. Here are the senior leaders embroiled in the sexual misconduct case. And it says, observers say they've never seen so many military leaders swept up in a scandal at the same time. Now, it's like you say, I think there are kind of 2 components to this. So one is it's always been these guys. It's always been the boomer generation, the cold warriors who just kind of hung around and partied all during the 80s and gave us the decade of darkness in the 90s with one scandal after another another. And they started like pretending to straighten up when Afghanistan hit, and they've been masquerading as serious military leaders ever since. But the fact of the matter is they're still the same philandering cold warriors they always were, and they still get up to the same bad behaviors. Like they're the ones that are going down all the time, and they turn around and start pointing the finger at the people who are coming in these days as a matter of course. Because I went to those town halls and I had to listen to the CAF strategic response team chief get up there and say that the concern was the people that were coming in these days, they're not being raised right, and they don't treat people properly and all this stuff. I was like, which generation was it that ran the prostitution ring in the North Pole again? Can we maybe yeah, it was these guys.
Yeah.
But the press comes after them, and the press says it's the military. And then they turn around and say, oh, yeah, it's the young people, because we remember what it was like when we were young people. And we're all like, yeah, but that was you guys. The generations that are coming in now, they're not like that. But I
Yeah.
digress.
Well, but it also provides good press cover
Hmm.
for other things that are going on. I mean, the Canadian Armed Forces has a huge abuse of power problem, and
Hmm.
the sexual misconduct stuff is just a symptom of it. But the press will mainstream press will grab on to sexual misconduct stories because they're juicy and
Yep.
they can do this scandal. But there's a whole lot going on in the Canadian forces that are, in my mind, are worse than some of the sexual misconduct allegations that are coming out.
Right.
And that's what my team and I are working to expose, because it's the stories like this are just a distraction and a symptom of the real problem.
Yeah.
So
And you're right. It is
that's
that abuse of power problem. And
mhm,
this mentality that I'm the boss, so what I say goes, and you do whatever the hell I say. Like there's no limit to that.
mhm,
Um,
yeah,
and I saw
yeah,
the attitude like my whole career. I saw it my whole career. It's
mhm,
absolutely the case that they basically
mhm,
view young troops as their serfs. Um,
mhm,
and okay, I'm gonna scroll down on this a little bit. I'm not gonna go into a deep dive, but it's a pretty good list. And I'll tell you what I find interesting about this list. So here we have retired General Jonathan Fans. So the general is the highest damn rank in the military. He's the only one. We have one general. And everybody, all the chiefs of the different branches, they're all lieutenant generals. So that's the highest guy. He gets kicked out. Now, the next one on deck here is Admiral Art McDonald. That's the Navy equivalent of a general. So, again, you're only going to have the one admiral, and he's going to be the chief of defense staff. So, Art was the successor to General Jonathan Vance. And he only lasted like a week or something. He was in that seat and right back out again.
mhm,
And then we have again, here's retired Lieutenant General Christopher Coates. And I
mhm,
remember I saw this one, and I happen to know Christopher Coates because I worked with him while I was in the United States. Now, I don't know, he's not like, it's not Chris and Jeff or anything like that. Like it's, he's the general. He was a brigadier general, and I was a sergeant. When I knew him, I was like his IT guy. But the thing is, I saw this one come down, and I was like, he wasn't one of the guys that I had pegged as being one of these crooked gangsters. He
mhm,
actually seemed like he was a really solid guy to me. No
mhm,
BS, very professional, and never gave me anything to, be suspicious about. So I always kind of looked at this one and said, "What's this? Looks like one of the ones that gets caught up in the hype." And as I
mhm,
understand it, it was an affair that he was having at the office, which, guys, you just spent years telling the rest of us not to do that. So don't do that. But it is the kind of thing that happens. That's life. At the same time, I
mhm,
don't think that I don't think that abuser necessarily applies here. It's more like hypocrisy. But yeah,
mhm,
I'll just say that I was surprised to see Christopher Coates in this mix. And then we have Vice Admiral Hayden. So again, the Vice Admiral is just one step down from the highest rank. So what we're seeing here, Lieutenant General, Vice Admiral, Major General, two steps down from the highest rank. So these guys are
mhm,
all Major General Danny Fortin. Again, that's two steps down from the highest rank. They're all the next in line to sit as the chief of defense staff, except for one or two guys that seem to be thrown in for kind of good measure here, like commanders, not that high of a rank for an officer. Lieutenant General Rouleau, very high profile one. He was in charge of the vaccine rollout there initially, but he got fired from that because of the sexual misconduct allegation, and then he got busted playing golf with Vance, which is not a good look for those guys. But I was like, well, you know what? Like, good on you. Good to see that egg on your face. And again, Vice Admiral Craig Barnes. So that's one rank down from the top. Lieutenant General, one rank down from the top. Lieutenant General, one rank down from the top. So it's all the guys who, with the exception of just a couple peons thrown in for good measure, I think,
mhm,
that are getting taken out here. So, like you say, this is a really good way to purge the upper echelons of the military of all the principal people who would have stood up and said, no, there's something wrong with this vaccine mandate. And eventually they'll get the guy in there who's willing to do anything. And apparently that's Wayne Iyer. What do you think?
Well, he's a long established liberal. He was never quiet about being a liberal all through his career. And I've been told that his wife is a chief of staff for a deputy minister in the Liberal government, which is against the rules, by the way, but I guess the rules don't apply when you're chief of defense staff. So,
or a liberal.
Yeah, or a liberal. As we were talking earlier about relatives doing certain things. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. We seem to be going back to a dynasty.
As much as there are bad apples in every organization, and Canadian Armed Forces aren't exempt to that, it's just too many and at too convenient a time.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
Yeah.
And like a big part of me is feeling the Schadenfreude of, it's nice to see you guys are finally eating your own here. Like your chickens are coming home to roost here. I think everybody can kind of see that it's not the troops, it's the leadership, or at least a lot of people are waking up to that. But then there is that other component of it with the timing and the level these people are at. Like they're all the top guys, all next in line for chief of defense staff. And so one has to wonder, are they the ones that were in line ahead of woke Wiener, General Iyer? And did we just see a political purge under the deputy ministership of, say, Jody Thomas, who was there the whole time the sexual misconduct scandal was going on? And as soon as this purge was all done, she gets a promotion to be the first ever, what do they call her? The security and intelligence advisor to the prime minister. And she's not a security or intelligence advisor of anything. She's a fisheries officer. She came from the Coast Guard. She's a career bureaucrat.
Well, it's like Anita Anand, who, when she was testifying for the commission, I'm listening to her testify and think, you know nothing about the military, like nothing about the military whatsoever. So qualifications for minister positions, I guess, are pretty low.
Yeah, and it's always more about the diversity cards these days. So it's good liberal optics to have a woman with no military experience in charge of the military. And it just kills us all the time. They keep putting these nothing know-it-alls in charge of the military. They don't understand the culture. They don't understand the policy even, or really, how a military should behave and operate. And it just becomes this petri dish for social experimentation.
Right.
All the
which is the last thing you want your military to be. I mean, that's not the military's terms of service. You're not signing up to be a woke warrior. You're signing up to be an actual warrior and defend Canada, and that takes a certain type of person to do. And you have to understand that person's mindset. You have to understand this is someone who is willing to put their life on the line for a country and the people of Canada. You didn't sign up to be, an example of the latest letter that's added to all of the other letters for diversity, right? So
yeah, it's a political whipping boy, I think, the military more broadly. The military is at least perceived to be something like a right-leaning institution, and say the press is more of a left-leaning institution, and so is the university. And so we tend to get attacked by the press in that regard. Like they're always coming after us because they think that we're a bunch of racist right-wingers or something. I'm sure they really believe it. And
unless they need you for a photo op, and when because you guys all look good in your uniform standing there representing Canada, so then that's a convenient time.
Exactly. And if they can't get one of us, then they'll just go to the Legion and drag some cold warrior off the stool with no medals and put him out there in his Legionnaires cap in front of the war monument. to tell us all
Yeah.
how ashamed he is of Canadians who went to the trucker convoy, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty gross. It's like it's a morally injurious practice too. You talk about people who sign up to serve, and these are the kinds of people who are classical liberals, like real liberals, like leave people alone, and they're big on fundamental freedoms and human rights and those kinds of things. And so you sign up for a life of service, in that cause, and what you end up with is being a political whipping boy for the left, and it tends to be a pretty morally injurious experience, I think, for a lot of folks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, we've gone back to another decade of darkness.
I think you're right about that.
Yeah. And this time might even be worse.
I think absolutely it will be too.
Yeah.
And it is already. But with the decade of darkness, I'll give my fourth turning take on that. And that was when the boomers first reached peak institutional power in the military. And I talk about the fourth turning all the time. And that was something, it's a crisis era that was forecasted by Neil Howe back in 1990 based on demographics. And he basically said that when the boomers reach peak institutional power, they're going to do this, they're going to tyrannize us. And the military was just the military in the decade of darkness was just like the canary in the coal mine. They got to peak institutional power there first. It took the Gen Xers coming into the ranks, like Private Kyle Brown, who blew the whistle on Somalia. That's basically been what the Gen Xers have been up to ever since, is we're blowing the whistle and filing the grievances on these guys. And it was kind of contained, like the collapse was contained because of the Somalia affair and some of the things that came out of that. They brought a lot of civilians back into the military from DND, so they would have been older people retired from the military who are coming back in to keep an eye on the boomers. But now they're all fully retired. They're not anywhere in the government of Canada anymore. And so we see, like, across the board, all of the institutions are run by the boomers now. And in the case of the military, it's been a long, slow collapse with 2 wars in between. And now with this purge and the vaccine mandate, like, man, there's nothing left of it. It's just destroyed.
No, it's completely destroyed. Yeah, Canada sits defenseless, in my opinion.
Me too. And all they want to do is poke
it
that.
wasn't so long ago. It was only a few weeks ago that Canada had 3 fighter jets fully operational with pilots to defend our entire country. We are an awfully big country for 3 little jets.
Exactly. So, and do we even have 3 anymore?
I don't know. That was about 3 weeks ago. We had 3. Who knows now?
Those are the F-18s, by the way, right?
Yeah, I know.
That's from the early. Those are early 80s. Those were state of the art in the early 80s. So.
Yeah, and I hear we have between 3 and 5 snipers to cover all of Western Canada, because it's just a small country.
Well, it's a good thing that we hold the record for the longest kill of any sniper.
Oh yeah, except the vaccine purge got rid of him too.
Yeah, that's right too. I think I heard him on a podcast down in the US not too long ago, and they even tried to threaten him with charges or something after he appeared on the podcast.
Yep.
Yeah, leave it to them.
Good thing he found a good Canadian lawyer, hey?
Anybody I know?
Might be, maybe somebody.
Okay. Well, I hope to hear more on that case as it progresses.
Yeah.
So this is one that you sent to me here, Catherine. CFB Edmonton soldier found guilty of attempting to murder her children in 2015 arson. That's horrible and sick. And there's a little picture of the suicide note that they left, and it says, an alleged suicide note, an Edmonton mother is accused of sending to a friend along with a large quantity of cash before a July 2015 fire at her CFB Edmonton home. The mother, who cannot be identified under publication ban, began a trial February 6, 2023 on counts of arson and attempted murder. Prosecutors allege she started the fire to kill herself and her 3 children, who returned to full custody of their father. So yeah, geez, that's I'm just saddened for the kids, in a situation like this. But
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
says the CFP Edmonton soldier
And she
has
was,
been convicted. Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
You can probably
Continue.
tell this story better than I can anyway. So
That's okay. I was just going to say, and she's been convicted of all 5 charges.
okay, well that's good.
She has
Yeah,
now. Yep.
it says
She'll be sentenced in June.
okay. All right, we'll keep an eye on that. All right. So what is the deal with this one then? Why do you want to draw our attention to this?
Why do I want to draw attention to it? Well, because I happen to know this story better than probably anyone except the dad and the kids, because I was dad's lawyer. I still am dad's lawyer.
Okay.
So 2015, he had managed, I wasn't his lawyer for this, but he managed to get full custody of his children. He put them into a summer camp while he went to fight fires in Saskatchewan. He was deployed. So fully accounted for where he was. She managed to get the kids out of the summer camp, took them to West Edmonton Mall, gave them a fun day, stayed overnight in Fantasyland Hotel, et cetera, et cetera. Took $10,000 cash, put it in an envelope, and mailed it with that letter to a friend of hers. She then took the kids home, sedated them, and herself, and I think herself, who knows, and then eventually started a fire with the intent of killing children. She didn't sedate the oldest boy enough, and he managed to get outside the house and call for help. And in fact, I believe 3 or 4 soldiers were given medals for going into the house to get everybody out.
Wow.
So that's July 2015. She doesn't get questioned by the military police about any of this until March of 2016. They spent 8 months trying to accuse the dad of starting the fire. That he somehow managed to fly back from Saskatchewan, light the fire, and get back to Saskatchewan without anybody noticing that he was gone. That was the story, her story. Then she changed it to one of the kids tampered with the smoke detectors, etc. Anyway, he continued to push for her to be charged with attempted murder, and basically the case was closed. And then in 2008, late 2018, he came to me and asked if I could help. My team and I put our heads together, and away we went. We knew that there was a fire report, a really good fire report done by her insurance company. They sent an inspector with a dog and everything. But of course, it's her insurance policy. They can't reveal it to us. So we sued the insurance company, and without ever going to court, they gave us that report, which clearly showed it was arson. The smoke detectors had been taken down off the ceiling and were in a bag by the fire, et cetera, et cetera. So Dad then took this to the MPs and said, it's arson, charge her. They did nothing. Meanwhile, in the family court, we go in and I managed to get her access to the children suspended. And she then brought us back into court saying she wanted to have access to the children. Thankfully, we had a really good case management justice who said to her, you're not getting near these kids unless you do a psychological parenting assessment that shows you're not a danger to your children. So we had to pick 3 each. She picked one that I happened to notice was a psychologist with the Canadian prison system. So I agreed to that one. So the report was done. He broke confidentiality and went to the MPs to say that this woman is dangerous and, you need to move forward with this. They still weren't really moving forward with this. So we started to prepare what's known as a private prosecution. So in Canada, you can do a criminal prosecution as a private citizen. And if there's merit to it, then the Crown will take it over. As we were preparing this, the MPs reopened their investigations. CFNIS got involved. Then the Crown took it, and eventually she was charged, went to trial in February, and now convicted. In the meantime, Dad, who was only 55 days away from retiring on a full pension, because he was serving as well, he had to pull the plug on his career because he just couldn't cope anymore with the betrayal that he saw of the forces had let him and his kids down, because his kids could have died It's just a miracle they didn't. So the kids are not doing well, as you can imagine, knowing that your mother tried to kill you and then having to go through almost 8 years of investigations and the trial itself. They had two of the older two gave testimony at the trial. So we have now filed a lawsuit against the Canadian Armed Forces for a bad investigation and failure to act on the allegations. I should also note that she's still serving, by the way. She's not officially removed. They'll kick someone out in a week, 5F, for not getting a vaccination, but this woman who's been charged for a few years, 3 years, 2019, they brought the charges. She's still in uniform. And I mean, I know they'll get around to releasing her, but she's still a serving member of the armed forces. So
yeah,
there you go. That's the story, Jeff.
I hope that's at least in military jail in Edmonton. You know, she can wear her uniform there and have to earn toilet paper. System. She was charged in the civilian system. Okay.
Yeah, so she'll go to women's prison.
Okay.
So each of the 5 counts she was convicted of carry a life sentence, so it's going to be interesting to see. And it was a judge alone trial, and it took him less than a week to bring back her conviction, which is fast.
So, you know, as I'm listening to this story, it's just incredible. Like, where do you think the reluctance on the part of the MPs comes from to pursue charges in a case like this?
Well, I think I'm just going to say it because I'm a woman. I can say it. I think it's because she was a woman in the Canadian Armed Forces, and they didn't want the scandal. This is right about the time honor's starting to happen. They're really trying to recruit women. Last thing they need is a killer woman in the armed forces. I mean, she should never have been serving in the first place because her psychological report, you know, it revealed she tried to kill 2 people before she ever joined the armed forces.
Wow.
So, and I mean, this is a dangerous woman.
Did she join before did she join before or after we had the serial killer Colonel Russell Williams?
When was he convicted again? I don't remember the
2012.
The year. She was in before.
Okay. Yeah, this is something I think we could do a better job of screening out for, especially when we're talking about, you know, teaching people to use automatic weapons. We might want to screen out a few murderers there. But yeah,
she was a bin rat. But
I'm glad you said it too. That there's this political component to it, and they don't want to get this scandal in the paper. They were probably trying to sweep a scandal under the rug. And also, I can't help but wonder if it has something to do with all the indoctrination that's been taking place in the force over the course of basically my entire career, where you know, what is now, I guess, 4th wave feminism started it out as 3rd wave feminism, but there tends to be, all of that usual kind of cultural Marxist indoctrination taking place over like a long period of time. And so, and in the culturally Marxist view, the 3rd wave feminist view is essentially that they cast women as the proletariat and men as the oppressor class, you know, the bourgeoisie or oppressor class. And so it maybe is just the case that they're so damn conditioned in the military to think in these terms that when somebody from the supposed oppressed class or victim class is accused of being a victimizer, perhaps they can't even accept that as being realistic. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there was a real disconnect. The acceptance that a mother would try to kill her children, society struggles with that. But I mean, when the evidence was staring them in the face, and that they would even try to accuse the dad who was deployed. He was completely accountable
Right.
for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week being deployed. I mean, it
Right.
isn't even that he happened to be in the area, it was yeah. And they went after him hard for 8 months while he's saying to them, "Look at her. Look at
Hmm.
the custody issue," you know?
Yeah. Look at
He
the one
even
who was
then
there.
at one point he got a yeah, at one point he got a photocopy of this suicide note and took it to them, and they just were not going to accept, or they put the suicide note in a separate investigative file from the fire. Like they didn't even put them together. And I suspect it was probably deliberate because they didn't want to put all that evidence in one place.
Hmm.
But this is why I do what I do, because as soon as he came to me, he's like, no, 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 no. She's not going to get away with this if I can help it. So I got in touch with staff who had worked with me at the time when he first came to us and everything. We had a big celebration that we had managed to convict her, get her convicted for this because,
Bet. Yeah.
yeah, and
And
so yeah, we'll see what happens with the lawsuit because he and his kids certainly, in my opinion, deserve some compensation for what they were put through
8 years is half a lifetime
after
to a
the fact.
child.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Well, one of the kids is about to turn 18.
Yeah.
The
Imagine.
oldest one. Yeah.
What a sin.
Meanwhile, they're going to need psychological support for life, and yeah, they're
No
pretty
doubt.
messed up. So
Yeah. No
yeah,
doubt.
breaks my heart.
Um,
Yeah.
and I guess it kind of reminds me, but this doesn't really fit with the cultural Marxist narrative. But I remember when Russell Williams first came on the scene, there started hitting the news. One of the stories about him, and this is true, is that they had him dead to rights while he was in Trenton. He had kidnapped one of his neighbors and had her tied up in the house. And she managed to get free and then went and got the MPs to report the whole thing. And they just wrote her off as being hysterical or crazy or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And yeah, I think there's that. Well, in the case of Russell Williams, he was just so highly esteemed, I think, that they found it to be incredulous. They just couldn't bring themselves to think that such a prestigious, high-ranking officer.
Yeah, they couldn't accept that someone who had been a pilot for the Queen would possibly be this bad guy. Personally, I think there's probably a lot more victims of Russell Williams nobody knows about because he was all over the planet.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that is
yeah.
true. There's what we know about, and what we know about is disturbing enough. I mean, the collection of panties,
Mm-hmm.
and the photographs
Mm-hmm.
that he had, like he was a very busy guy.
Yeah, and I found it ironic how fast he capitulated under interrogation, probably because he knew he couldn't risk being in the military justice system and ending up in Club Edmonton.
I
Because
don't know.
one of his victims was a military member, right? So he could have been charged under.
Yeah, that was
and convicted at court martial.
Corporal Cuomo was his own subordinate. That's a woman with whose welfare he's charged under QRNO 5.05. So that makes that a new low, even for a serial killer.
Even for a serial killer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
All right. So you're going to be going. I saw you're on here somewhere.
Oh, I'm wearing their sweatshirt. It says on the back, "History is calling."
Oh, so. Nice. Okay. So we had Tom Marazzo on here last night too. Tom was giving testimony this morning. I haven't even seen it yet. I was doing Chris Dacey at I was interviewing Chris Dacey at the noon hour here, and anyway, I ended up steering onto that instead of taking in Tom's testimony. But I'll get back on that. So you're going to be at which one? The Winnipeg?
Red Deer.
Red Deer. Okay.
Red Deer in Alberta. Yep.
Okay, here you are. And anyway, these guys are all over the place. So I've been plugging them like crazy. I think this National Citizens Inquiry is probably the next great hope here in Canada. Obviously, the Emergency Measures Act was a nothing burger.
That was a joke. They got to be doing something right because YouTube suspended their ability to do a live feed for 7 days. You know you're doing it right when that happens.
Exactly. That just means you're over the
So
target.
yeah, that's
Uh,
right. So I've got an hour,
mhm.
100,000 pages of evidence that I somehow need to condense into a 1 hour uh, understandable presentation. And I'm also at this point madly writing the brief to provide them with the written evidence to go with it. But yeah,
Okay.
so there I am.
Okay. And
And because I'm not in the chain of command, I felt it was an appropriate thing to do to come forward and speak on the behalf of people still serving and veterans that got shafted during this whole COVID thing. So.
and do you have any spoilers that you're able to give us?
It's pretty much the same stuff I've been saying already, but I can't wait
Okay.
to put up the clip of air on the national news telling everybody how awful all these people who wouldn't take the vaccine were and don't deserve to be in serving in the military. And then I will give 30 examples of the people who were forced out, people with chests full of medals, exemplary records with nothing. They'd never stepped a foot wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Highly skilled people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've done the calculations. We're calculating that Canada has lost about $3 billion in training and experience and expertise
Mm-hmm.
with the purge vaccine.
Yeah, no
$3
doubt.
billion. Yeah.
Yeah, and he would have been
Yeah.
saying those things about people with decades of service, tours in Afghanistan, in Iraq. I'm not just talking about myself here. Like if I stayed in, that I would fit that profile perfectly. So I mean, we take that to heart around here. I think at Veterans for Freedom because. God, it was just such a scumbag move to get out there on the news and give the finger wag to all these people.
Yeah.
About how they're undisciplined as soldiers. It's an issue of professionalism on their part. It was just so grotesque to watch.
I've a sexual assault victim who was legitimately sexually assaulted by someone by her superior while she was in basic training, and all she saw was that a man was going to tell her to accept something into her body she didn't want to accept when the mandate came down. And then she's told that she's not suitable to serve.
So that's basically an exacerbation.
I have a problem with that.
No kidding. And I've drawn that comparison myself here on the podcast multiple times. It's a quid pro quo. Right. You'd better let me penetrate your body. You want to keep this job, you better let me penetrate your body, deposit a little genetic material in there. And when I get done with you, you'll never be the same. So there, I mean, I'm not saying that.
And some of,
I was just going to say, I'm not saying that it's the same as getting raped, but there is this other component of it where now you have this product in your body and there's no telling what the lasting effects of that are going to be. So that's the kind of thing that nobody gets to move on from, whereas even in the case of an egregious sexual assault, not making light of it, it consumes a person's entire life when it happens to them. But it is the kind of thing that people do move on from, whereas that may not be the case here.
Right. I mean, I've even had some of the plaintiffs in this lawsuit comparing having to stand there and be watched putting the test swabs up their nose. You're demanding to be able to that you can stand in front of me and watch me penetrate my body with something, and that's okay in the Canadian Armed Forces.
No,
is it
grotesque? I'll tell you what. I mean, in accordance with the training that I received over the years, nope, that doesn't fly whatsoever. I came in 2001. I got sharp training on basic training in 2001, sexual harassment and racism prevention. And I can remember even back then, I was sitting there while they're trying to lecture us about what constitutes proper behavior, and it's all kind of demeaning and belittling. And even like the way they were talking to us, it's like, hang on a second here. We didn't have anything to do with, I actually said this because it's all in civilians and everything. I was like, none of these people had anything to do with what happened in this institution over the last couple of decades. Like, that was you guys. And I'm still, 20 years later, I'm looking at a guy like Wayne Iyer and I'm like, that wasn't us. That was you guys.
Yeah. Well, I know at RMC several years ago, they had a young woman come in, a civilian come in to give them training, I guess, on conduct related to sexual stuff. And she basically stood up in front of the entire group and said, "You're all rapists." And then she went to the press and complained about how they closed down and were terrible. Well, if you come in to a room and you tell them, start with that, you've lost your audience. I mean, because they're not.
No.
There might be a few in there, but not. Was
that at RMC? The training.
There was one at RMC.
Yeah. Yeah. There might have been.
Whereas I've done town halls where, I've walked out with a helmet full of condoms that are camouflage and said, if you don't want to use me as a lawyer, use one of these. Everybody laughs.
Yep.
Broken, and because I look like I'm their mother or their grandmother.
Yeah.
And they don't expect it from me, but so there's ways. You have to understand the culture if you're going to, before you get a government contract to do something. How about you understand the culture before you go in there?
And so we appreciate that kind of candor in the veteran circles. So
yes, you do.
Yeah.
So,
well done.
Yeah.
Shoot, I was just gonna ask you something else there about that. I think I lost it. I'll come back to it. I think it'll pop back into my head here. But if anybody wants to check out Catherine's website, here it is. This is Valour Law. And it's like I said, this is a really valuable service, I think, that we really need in Canada, because down in the United States, they actually have an inspector general for their military, and they field and investigate all complaints. It's arm's distance, arm's length from the chain of command. It's a lot like the ombudsman concept, but the problem with the ombudsman is he still reports to the chief of defense staff, so it's still part of the chain of command, and they're basically
the ombudsman. Yeah, the ombudsman has no teeth. And in fact, I'll be honest with you, Jeff, I've become the de facto ombudsman.
Exactly.
I'm getting calls and emails about all kinds of stuff going on in the CAF. In fact, I'd like to say, because I believe it's true, I probably know more about what's going on in the Canadian Armed Forces right now than General Air.
I believe it.
Because I got people willing to talk to me.
Exactly.
And I'm willing to listen.
And that, my whole 20 years, I've been hearing this same narrative about, excuse me, rebuilding trust in the chain of command. The troops will not go to the chain of command when they have an issue. And they're supposed to be able to do that, because we take people out of their hometowns and send them all over the country and the world. So they never really have, a social support structure. They don't have, the same friends that they had in school living around them. They don't have their family around them, their extended family. And, you're kind of starting over anew everywhere you go. And the idea is you come into a military community, and then we all kind of take care of each other in the way that your regular social support network would. But it never really goes that way. And so if you're, I don't want to get into too much detail or anything, but if you're a sergeant major and you know that there's something going on with a guy, and it's like, this guy's got a problem of some kind, I'm not sure if it's mental health or social or what it is, but it's not a disciplinary issue. Good luck dragging it out of them, because they're all gun shy. So if they do have a real issue with something with which they need some help, that the chain of command should be able to handle and help with appropriately, they won't ask for that help. They won't come for that. They'll hide it at all costs, because
Right.
mental health issues, social issues are basically treated as disciplinary issues, and it's got everything to do with keeping us out of the news.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. So, yeah, I consider it a huge honor of the trust that members and veterans put in me, because I know it's not easily given. And to be honest with you, the whole COVID mandate thing, what little respect there was for the chain of command that was left is shattered. There is no trust. There's no respect. You don't have a military if you don't trust your chain of command. How
Mhm.
can you have a military? Because this is the person that's going to give you an order to potentially do something that's fatal, and you don't trust them. You're not going to do it.
Mhm.
You're not. You're going to question everything that they're doing. So yeah, our
Well,
military is beyond broken at this point.
I often give the example of the evaluation system, the Canadian Forces Personnel Appraisal
Mm,
System. We do the annual
yeah.
evaluations, and it's a very familiar problem to anybody who has ever served. um, and routinely, as a matter of course, since at least 2010, the generals of that military have ordered their subordinate troops, subordinate supervisors, to cut corners on that evaluation process. They even cut short the reporting period, which is supposed to go to March 31st, to the end of the fiscal year, and they'll conclude their boards and have their documents finalized in mid-February, just to make sure that their reports are all finalized and submitted early and looking pristine. It's the classic rubber stamp that the chain of command engages in, so that there's a
Hmm.
report that makes it appear as if a good job has been done, when in fact it has not, and they haven't followed the process that they were ordered to follow by the commission into Somalia. Um, and the thing is that, year after year, I always bring it up. I always say, yeah, we're not allowed to do this. It's not policy compliant, and I always get told to shut up and go away, because you put on that uniform, you accept unlimited liability on behalf of your country, you follow orders, and that's what it always comes down to. You have an order from a general, and I'm like, yeah, but he's invested with that public trust, that authority to give me an order for the purpose of telling me to charge a hill towards certain death. And he's
Hmm.
using that power to spare himself the effort of having to earn his goddamn salary. So,
Hmm.
how are you supposed to
And get
trust
promoted.
and get promoted? Right. It's all about his career, and he's standing on the backs of his subordinates to get that
Hmm.
promotion. So it's like, well, um, how do you expect the troops to even be convinced that they're going to war for the right reasons under such circumstances?
Well, and it's going to bite them in the ass, to be honest with you, Jeff, because all these exemplary MPR or personnel records and reports
Mm-hmm.
now justify why you just release this person 5F when they've been an exemplary soldier according to their record. So
Mm-hmm.
if they've been absolutely perfect for 30 years, why are they suddenly a problem now? So
Yep.
there might be a bit of revenge for that, Jeff.
Yep. And keep
Yep.
everything, folks. For any young person out there who might still be serving, I'm sure you've heard it before, but just keep everything, every scrap of documentation that has your name on it, or ever even so much as enters your inbox. Just save it. I'm still
Yep.
fighting
Back
three
up your
grievances.
email.
Yep, I back up all
Yep.
my email, like going back decades, and I'm still fighting three grievances with the CAF myself. As a matter of
Mhm.
fact, I just escalated. Well, let's see. The first one that actually went somewhere just escalated to the final authority last week, and at the same time, I was following up
Oh,
on the
so
other.
in 10 years you'll hear about it.
I know, but it's a joke. They just rubber stamp it at the
Hmm.
initial authority
Yep.
level, and I always end up saying in my letter to escalate, like, did you even read what I wrote here? Because I'm just repeating myself now. This stuff was addressed,
Hmm.
and You know, what you're saying contradicts the evidence that I've provided, where other people are saying this and that. Yeah, you always end up escalating.
Mhm.
Can't say that I've seen any satisfaction out of that system in my
Yeah.
career, because the one time that I did get a very favorable decision with respect to one of those evaluations, it was 1 week before my next promotion parade anyway. So it had absolutely no impact on my career progression whatsoever. And I still have 2 more that they just sat on and did nothing with. And after my last follow-up with the same standard response of, we're still investigating how to move this forward, I reached out to, if you don't know what this is, it's the IC2M. So that's the Integrated Conflict and Complaints Management System, which is something they just stood up a couple of years ago, but it's a good idea as a focal point for the complaints systems. And they seem to kind of have their stuff together, because they reached out to the chain of command and said, give us these grievances and we'll handle this. So I was happy to see that. But it is like pulling teeth, for crying out loud. They're not engaging in good faith ever.
No. So, and you know, the retired Supreme Court Justice Fish, there's a binder on my desk that's about 4 or 5 inches thick of his report. Basically says the grievance system doesn't work and it's broken. And that was published a few years ago. Nothing's changed.
Yeah. And I'll, I think I was going to throw something in about, because you're basically the stand-in for the Inspector General here in Canada. That's
pretty much.
Yeah. And that is something.
I just need their staff.
Oh yeah. Good luck with that. You don't have the unlimited pockets of the United States government backing you up, I'm sure. But with the Canadian Armed Forces, like, they have these various overlapping kind of complaints processes. The main one being the grievance system, and then there's like the harassment complaints process. And but the thing is, they all follow these different policies. They all go through the same people, and those people are the chains of command, who see a complaint and look at that as like a blot on their reputation, or a signal to their superiors that they're failing as leaders. And every attempt is made to squash it, even, you know, as far as destroying the, and usually at least intimidating the complainant. And so there's that conflict of interest in there, but it's like, no, we're the pure professional, highly disciplined Canadian Armed Forces. There's not going to be any of that bias on our part. But
sorry. Well, I do my sarcastic laugh there.
It is laughable though. But in the US, what they do is they submit their complaints to the Inspector General. So it's separate from the chain of command. And I think that basically we need a reform of the Ombudsman's office to give it teeth like they have in the United States with the Inspector General, and just have that Inspector General provide a report directly to Parliament instead of going to the Chief of Defence Staff. Because and even the minister, because you know, what was the complaint? Minister of Stolen Valor there swept one under the rug. Shoot, I can't remember, but I think it was another one of these sexual misconduct ones. It got all the way up to, it was Vance. It was Vance, remember? Harjit St. John knew about Vance, and he swept that under the rug. So that's the problem, is the separation of powers, I think, is required.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And something has to be done. Well, here's the thing, with the whole vaccine part of it, where people were being denied religious accommodations, so they'd call the ombudsman. The ombudsman, I've even got one guy got yelled at by the ombudsman for even daring to bring it forward. So they, you know, if you're the ombudsman, you have to be willing to look at everything. You can't pick and choose what cases you want. The other thing I've learned and not too long ago is that the ombudsman doesn't have any way of tracking. They're not tracking complaints that come in. If they decide they're not going to take it, it goes in the shredder. They are not tracking. Any complaint, they could not give you stats on how many complaints they've had about X, Y, or Z.
Wow. I
Yeah.
think
So
I
that
seem to remember like
I'm a big
years
fan
ago.
of reforming that.
Is that sounds like a capability that they've lost. I think I can remember even in the
Mhm.
mid 2000s seeing reports that would say like these are the reasons that we see complaints coming in, and the majority are over the evaluation process there and the PER
Mhm.
system. Um,
Yep. So,
but everything is kind of falling apart. If you look around all over
mhm.
government Canada and the country, I think that there are a lot of things that it seems like we used to be able to do this and now we can't. Power
Right.
outages are going
Right.
longer. We don't seem to be responding to storms as efficiently as we once did. I've noticed that around here on the East Coast, especially. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's a state of institutional collapse, I think, across the board. Holy smokes!
End of empires.
It is. It is
I have
end
a
of
I have a master's degree in historical archaeology. This very much looks like to me like the end of one civilization and the creation of the next one. So
Yep. I
we are living in historic times.
and
So,
end times. I hear
mm,
Christians invoking Revelations quite a bit, and I
mhm.
think it's sort of a it's not a proper what do you call it? I'm losing my words right now. But anyway, it's not the end of the world. I think that's described in
Right.
Revelations. It's the end of the empire. And my
Mhm.
understanding is that it's like a rich allegory for the collapse of particularly the East Roman Empire, and
Mhm.
the seven-headed Hydra coming up out of the sea was the seven caliphs of the caliphate that came exploding out of Arabia
Mhm. Yep.
somewhere around 100 years after Muhammad's death, had an empire like three times the size of what the Romans ever had. So,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yep.
I think it's a social
Civilizations
trend.
rise and fall. You know,
Yes. Yeah. Um,
humans continue, but the civilizations rise and fall, and
and
there's a long history of it.
and I think our ancestors have been trying to document all of the social harbingers of the coming collapse, and so that's what we see.
Mhm.
That's what we see in the prophecies. Really, is they're just kind of taking the social trends that they saw at the time and saying, if things continue in this direction, then it'll probably look like this. A lot like what Orwell did, you
Mhm.
know? Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I remember them teaching us Orwell, 1984 in high school,
Mhm.
and thinking, no, that won't happen. Too late.
It's
Uh,
it's weird, right? Um,
it is how eerily accurate it was. I don't know if you caught Dr. Malone's presentation at the Toronto
mhm.
NCI hearing yesterday.
Yep.
It's the same presentation he made down in Atlanta. So it was my second time hearing it, and it was just as powerful hearing it yesterday as it was last weekend. So,
Yeah. No, he
but
was great. I was
the,
surprised actually. He dove into some stuff that I wasn't expecting from. I mean, I'd seen him do it a little bit elsewhere, I guess, but
mm-hmm,
he talked about the fifth generational warfare quite a bit. We talk about that a lot
mm-hmm,
around here, and
mm-hmm.
he is way down the rabbit hole. That guy is like, I was
Yeah,
impressed. Yeah, he's on top of his
yeah,
stuff. So
he is very much so. Yeah.
I got Catherine's Give Send Go up here. If you want to contribute to the Valour lawsuit, this is pursuit of justice through supporting the federal level legal challenge to the Canadian Armed Forces COVID-19 vaccine mandate. The CDS directive and its process is an abuse of power. Winds are mounting. Oh, sorry. Winds are mounting across the world against mandates. Let us work together to hold the CAF accountable, expose its corrupt core, and defend our charter rights. Yeah, well done. So you guys can go read up on the rest of that there if you want to support the campaign, but definitely a worthy cause. And like I said, like vital in Canada right now because it's just a service
There's
that's not.
only a handful of lawyers willing to take this on in Canada, so we're doing what we can.
Yeah,
But then there's only a handful in the U.S. as well,
yeah,
and I happened to be in the room with most of them last weekend, and it was refreshing to be in a room with people that were all thinking the same way. It
Yeah.
was well worth making the time to go down and be there. So
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I think I might be due for a little bit of travel and get with some of those similarly minded people type conference deals as well. So, a couple of events coming up in the
Mhm.
spring. Weather's warming up a little bit. I'm pretty excited actually for whatever is coming our way in the freedom movement. It always seems like we have
Mhm.
more fun in the summer.
I'm working with Veterans for Freedom West to do a veterans retreat here on my quarter section west of Edmonton.
Okay.
So we're looking at developing quite a large garden, and excess produce will go to the Veterans Food Bank. And some of the guys are looking at putting up a range out here because
Oh wow.
it was a neglected quarter section for 50 years, so the forest has taken over.
Yeah.
And I've invited them out here they said, can we put up a range? I said, absolutely. I need to practice with my handgun and my dad's Lee Enfield rifle. I need to practice with those. So hurry up and get a range put up so I can practice
Nice. Nice.
with
That'd be
them.
great.
So, mhm.
And I
My
think
dad
that's
has a
I was just going to say, I think that's going to be our generation's
PA.
Legion. Like everybody's, disillusioned with the
Mhm.
Legion, and I think we're leaning more
Mhm.
towards like campfires and range days.
Yep. Yep. Like I said, it's all forested again. So we've got lots of trees for them to be. And I have one veteran who doesn't want to deal with people, but he loves to chop firewood.
Hmm.
So he comes out and he harvests trees and chops up firewood for my wood stove, and he's happy because he can. And my brother lives here as well as my son, and none of us are fazed by veterans who are, if they've got PTSD or brain injury, or
Hmm.
they just don't want to be social.
Hmm.
Doesn't bother us, and they can go off and do their thing. So
Nice.
yeah, this is it's helps me out because it helps get some of this forest cut down
Yeah.
so I can build a new house.
Yeah.
And as I
It's
said,
all
I get
good.
to practice with my range without having to get permission from the chief firearms officer every time I want to move to the range with my handgun.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So,
Um,
mhm,
yeah. Nice. I
yeah.
mean, no, that's great. And
Mhm,
in addition to everything you're doing on the legal front, you have that going on for veterans behind the scenes. Like that's wonderful. So,
I do.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure the guys really appreciate it. And out there in V4F West, man,
Mhm.
they got a pretty solid team. Those guys are getting some traction under different events and stuff like that now. So, yeah,
Mhm.
it's pretty great to see everybody coming together.
It is.
So,
Yep.
yeah, that's all great stuff, Catherine. Before I
Mhm.
let you go here, do you want to do? Did you want to draw any attention to anything else up and coming? I guess on the horizon. What do you see?
Up and coming on the horizon. So the big lawsuit should be dropping before too long. We've got
Hmm.
the other one for the dad. I'm working on a couple more related to mess dues and mess kits.
Hmm.
Somebody's approached me about.
Okay.
I connected with an audiologist down at the conference because I've got it's brewing in the background a large class action lawsuit regarding hearing loss. I've got all the medical evidence to show that if you've been exposed to diesel fuel and jet fuel, you will have hearing loss from a chemical damage, not just the noise damage, the
Hmm.
chemical damage.
Hmm.
And one of the jet pilots told me, completely shocked me. He said, when I land in a base that's not my own, they hand the hose up to me. I fuel my own jet. I'm not allowed to get out, and I'm covered in jet fuel, and I fly back home.
Hmm.
So, for hearing
Really?
loss, so we're working on a class action on that one. I've got all the stuff, and I'm just starting to get a couple of plaintiffs because lawyers can't sue if we don't have plaintiffs.
Hmm.
Someone brought me all of this evidence before. In the course of the bigger lawsuit, we did some ATIPs on environmental hazards that military are exposed to in Canada.
Hmm.
The first ATIP that we did, they came back with, well, to get started, we have to go for 33 years.
Hmm.
It'll take 33 years to give us all that evidence. So all that's being done through the Valour Legal Action Center, which is my nonprofit that I set up to help do some of these bigger lawsuits, so that
Right.
they're funded by donation, so the government can't run one person out of money. That's their
Okay.
favorite tactic. So that's how I'm getting around it.
I didn't get that
Yeah.
up before, or the website there. Can you give us the name one more
Yeah,
time?
that's okay. It's ValourLegalActionCenter.org.
Okay. All right. So if you guys want to donate any of those bigger lawsuits that we have coming, I would, yeah, I'd say this is a very vital service in Canada. It's a very worthy cause, and nothing's ever going to change. Like the institution is really, it's not capable of being reformed from within. It has to come from the outside. So I really think this is the only way it's ever going to happen. With this
The
kind of
Americans
election.
have been very successful at pushing with lawsuits to change things.
Mhm.
And we have lots to learn from them, from those tactics. We've only had a constitution for 40 years. They've had over 200 years ahead of us, holding their
That's
government to account
Mhm.
in the courts. So, and the only way to get the courts to change is to also push for reform, and that's by exposing bad decisions. So,
Mhm.
we're
Yeah,
using the toolkits we have to move forward where we can. So,
and no shortage of clientele, I am sure, these
none.
days. Yeah.
But
So,
yeah, I'm good. My staff is teasing me that they need to clone me soon.
jeez, I bet. All right. Well,
Yeah.
thanks for being with us. It's great to catch up
Mhm.
again, Catherine. And I can't tell you how much I really appreciate what you're doing here with Valour Law. I
Mhm.
like I said, I spent 20 years in there, and I left going. It's just never going to reform. It's not possible to reform it from within. So anyway, I really appreciate you what you're doing,
Yeah,
and be sure and keep us apprised of any developments. We'll bring you back in here and
I will.
let us know. All right.
I will.
Okay. Take care
All
for
right.
now, and stay
Yeah.
frosty and stay safe out there, folks.